it going?
Good.
Good. Oh, it's so nice to see you here. So nice to be here. One of the things I love about this day is being able to come to schools. I'm always in school on the 30th or the 29th or the day after, and to see just a sea of orange. And it's always, for me, heartwarming because this is a lot of history that is in my family as well. And what I want to do for you today is just tell you some stories. Stories about my own life, read you a story, and hopefully talk to you about some of the stories that you have and some of the roles that you can play on this path towards reconciliation. And so, at the end of it too, I would love to encourage you, don't be shy because I'm not really an intimidating person. Don't be shy to ask questions. If you have questions for me, I'd love to hear them from you at the end of this. And I think that conversation is so important because reconciliation is not a one-sided conversation. It is us talking to each other. And I think that's so important. So if you have things to say to me, things you want to know from me, I'd love to hear from you. But I want to give you just a bit of a background about myself, just to let you know about me and where I'm from. And then get into some of my ideas about reconciliation, some of the stories that are so important. And I'm going to read to you one of those stories as well and break it down for you. My name's Dave, and I'm from Manitoba. And I've lived in Winnipeg for since I was about 2.5 years old, so almost my entire life. Winnipeg is a place that has a history, a story, and a history of coming together too. It is in Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, and the history of that place goes well beyond when Winnipeg actually became a city. Winnipeg is, one of the things it's most known for is a place called the Forks. Has anybody been to Winnipeg before, by the way? A couple people. So the Forks is where these two rivers come together. There is the Red River, and there is the Assiniboine River. My dad, who was Cree, he lived in a place called Norway House Cree Nation. That was where he was born and raised. He lived a very traditional way of living. He lived on a trap line for many years. One of my favorite books I've done is called the book called On the Trap Line. And it's really about my visit to his trap line to learn about where he grew up. He grew up on the land, he lived there, he learned there, he played there, and he got a lot of his ideas about life from living in that place. One of the things he used to tell me was that for many, many years, for a long time, one of the ways that we used to get around as Indigenous people was by using the water. He used to say the river was like our highway. That's how we used to travel. And because when two rivers come together, it's like two roads coming together. I know you guys know a lot about traffic here in Toronto, right? And so when two roads come together at those intersections, people meet. But we don't honk at each other. A long time ago, we didn't honk at each other. We would come together in those intersections and we would gather. And we would share things, we would share artifacts. There's artifacts in that place that are over 6,000 years old. And so we would come together in that place for that many years. We would also share stories with each other. And those stories were not meant to just be kept and held, but they were also meant to always be shared. And that's why I wrote a book called The Barren Grounds about 5 years ago. And that book is actually based on an old story called the Fisher Star Constellation Story. In Cree, it's Ochak Fisher and Stars. And one of the ways in which I was really made aware of how the stories live on forever and how they're shared and shared and shared over again is when I was learning about the Fisher Star Constellation Story. I did research on it. What I found was that there were versions of that story from Alberta into Saskatchewan, into Manitoba, and into Ontario. You have a great storyteller here in Ontario. His name is Isaac Murdoch, and he tells a version of the Fisher Star Constellation Story. There's a version of it from Norway House Cree Nation by a guy named Murdo Scribe. And so what I found was that all these different versions of all these stories, I said, well, no one like made these up here, made it up here, made it up here. They all came from one place. And that was in these gatherings, where we would share things with each other, like stories. We'd take these stories away as gifts, and we'd share them with other people. And that's how stories live on forever. That's how they have a lasting and forever impact. And so we talk about a day like today, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, is also about stories and how the stories that you hear, the things that you learn and take away, hopefully you continue to share them over and over again. And what I'd like to say to kids, because for me as a writer, I've been doing this for about 15 years. I've been writing professionally, and one of the great gifts as a writer and as a storyteller is that I get to go from coast to coast to coast, all across Canada, all year, all the time, and meet kids in almost every school across this country. And one thing I love about it is that I see in all these schools, all of you kids are also all teachers, and that was mentioned here before. You're all educators. I say to everybody, everything that you do and everything that you say always teaches somebody something. The question I want to ask yourself always is, what do I want to teach people? What gifts do I want to give to people? Because teaching somebody is a gift. And I'm going to read to you a little bit of a book called When We Were Alone. And I have a story about that too, about how kids can be teachers. That book was one of the first picture books ever written for young people about the residential school history here in this country. We've come a long way. I love to do this because it makes me feel so good about how well we've done here in this country, in Canada, this place we now call Canada. Who here in this crowd has learned about the residential school system in Canada? Put up your hand. Every single hand comes up. And I think that is such an encouraging thing. When I first started out, when I would ask that question, especially for young kids, like grade 8 below, very few hands would come up. And so we've come so far. But there was a time when we had a long way to go yet. We still have a long way to go. We had even further to go. And so I wrote a book about 9 years ago called When We Were Alone. It was a picture book about residential school history. And I remember when I wrote that book, a lot of people were saying, oh, you can't write about that for young kids. You can't write about residential schools for young kids. It's too hard to do that. And I always used to say, it only seems so hard because we haven't done it yet. And so I wrote this book called When We Were Alone. One of the first schools I ever went to read this book to was in Calgary. And I remember going to this, it was a grade 1 classroom. And before I got there, the kids in that class had read the book already. About a few days before I got there. When I got there, I read it to them again. I read this book to them, and it was a great experience for everybody. We learned a lot together. And then after school, after this class was over, I was talking to the teacher. The teacher told me a story. The teacher told me a story, and she said, I was in class the other day. After class, a parent came up to me. One of the kids, and the parent said, what did you read to my kid yesterday? And the teacher was very nervous because she thought, oh, I'm going to be in trouble for reading a young kid, reading about residential school history to a young kid. And the teacher showed the parent the book When We Were Alone, and the parent said, well, I have to tell you that I never learned about residential schools before, and last night over dinner, my kid taught me about residential schools. It was because that kid had learned about the history from a book. And so that's why I'm so excited to come here today, because books are so important. The stories are so important. So today is not called the National Day for Reconciliation. What is the other word there? Truth, right? So the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, truth are stories. And we don't get reconciliation without truth. It all starts with truth. And so I just wanted to tell you that. I wanted to tell you that you're all teachers. And you all have the ability to teach somebody something with what you've learned all the time, whether it's your parent or a friend. And it's so important. And that's how we get to know each other. My dad was such a great teacher of mine. He taught me almost everything that I know about what I do today. We all used to talk to each other. He was a mentor to me. And we used to talk a lot about reconciliation and what it really meant, what we were trying to do, and how do we get there. And the first thing I want to say is that one thing we used to talk about is that it takes a long time. And so we have to be patient and know that what we do today will have an impact for a very long time down the road. But we're in a marathon, and it's not a sprint. So we have to be patient. By the time you're all in high school, we'll still be doing this work, but we'll be further along then than we are now. And that's a very important thing to know. To never give up and to always tell stories, to always keep working at it. And hopefully that tomorrow, today, is not just a day that we do this and we just forget about it, but it's something that we do every day going forward, that we're always learning, we're always reading, we're always teaching each other, we're always talking. And I think it's so important. The other thing we should talk about is like, what is reconciliation even? It seems like such this big word. I don't even know what it means. Where do I even start? My dad had this very simple way of explaining it. You know, my dad passed away about 6 years ago, in 2019. And before he passed away, he was working with a group of elders or knowledge keepers. He used to call elders grandparents. That was his way of referring to elders. He was working with a group of elders, a group of grandparents, and they were trying to define what reconciliation is, because in Cree, it is such a descriptive language. It's such a beautiful language, where one little word can mean a whole sentence. Like there's a word in Cree, and you don't get this so much in Toronto, well, you can get it in a different way. There's a word in Cree, it's called kisanow. It's a very, very quick word, kisanow, right? It sounds like it's saying kiss now, but it's not what it's saying. But it's a word that says kiss now. And what it means in English is, it is bitterly cold outside. It's a long sentence. It's a descriptive language. It's a beautiful language. And how he was trying to describe reconciliation, he told me one day, it kind of looks like this. It's two people, or in this case, one person in front of a lot of people, having a conversation. They talk to each other. And when we do that, what we do is we share stories to each other. You tell me something about you. I tell you something about me. And we listen to each other very carefully. And what we do when it happens is we get to understand each other better. We get to know each other better. We get to respect each other more by listening and learning. And that's really the simplest way to describe what reconciliation is. It's a conversation. And today, certainly we want to talk about the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. It's very, very important. We have a relationship that we're building and building stronger all the time. But I also like to point out that we live in this really diverse community. If you look around at everybody here in the stands, there are people from all different backgrounds. And I just want to say, as connected to the whole part of community, is that we should always take the time to learn from each other, to tell stories to each other, to get to know each other better all the time, and to build respect for one another. And I think that's such an important thing to do, no matter what background you're from, is to take the time to do that. And when we do that, what we do is what I think reconciliation really is all about. And that is we build community. We build community with each other. We become a group of people who are diverse, but who are stronger together. And it's, a lot of Indigenous people, and I'm trying to get there myself. I used to always have short hair. I used to shave my hair every summer. I'm trying to grow my hair out and grow a braid. That's my big goal. But in a braid, what you get is you have different strands of hair, right? And if you have one strand of hair, another strand of hair, another strand of hair, and when you get it on its own, it feels pretty flimsy, it feels pretty weak, doesn't it? What happens when you tie them all together? It becomes a lot stronger, right? And that's what a community is. It's all these different threads of people, all these different strands tied together and being stronger together. I think that reflects the spirit of reconciliation. I think that reflects what we're really trying to do, is we're really trying to build a community together. And so hopefully we can do that here today. What I want to do is to talk to you just quickly about a little bit about my background, some of the inspirations behind a book like When We Were Alone. And I'm going to read When We Were Alone to you. I'm going to break down some of the pages for you and talk about them individually so we can have a learning experience together. But I wanted to let you know kind of where I'm coming from and through a little bit of my background, especially when it comes to residential school history. When I was in school, when I was your age, I'm very old now, I'm 48. When I was in school in the 80s, in the 90s, we never learned about residential schools. Actually, all the way from kindergarten all the way to grade 12, not once did we learn about residential school history. It was a lost history, it was a forgotten history, it was an ignored history. And so the fact that you're learning it now at all grade levels is such a great thing to see. But for me, if you told me about residential schools when I was even in university, I wouldn't even know what you're talking about. I wouldn't even believe that could happen in Canada. And it was weird too, because I went to a high school called Calvin High School in Winnipeg, and just down the street from Calvin High School, a 5-minute walk away, there was a residential school building still standing. And there were kids that had gone there for many, many years that we didn't even know were there. We didn't even know that building was even there. And that's how much we didn't know back then. And in my family, it was really hard for me when I got older to realize that I didn't learn any of that history. But at the same time, so many people in my family had gone through that experience. My grandmother went to a school called Norrie House Indian Residential School. And she went there from in the 1920s into the 1930s. Long, long, long time ago. But she passed away in 1984 when I was 7 years old. I called her Nana. But in all the years that I knew her, in all the years that all my family knew her, all the years that my dad knew her, his mom, she never once talked about her story. She never once told people about what had happened to her at Norrie House Indian Residential School. And that was a lost history. And one of the things that I hope that today does is encourage, and it's totally different today, because we're encouraging elders, survivors to tell their stories in safe spaces so that they feel empowered to tell their stories, so they feel safe to tell their stories, and that they know that these stories will be heard and listened to and carried forward. And like I said before, forever and ever and ever. My grandmother went to residential school. Her brother and sister went to residential school. Her sister is one of the people, one of the kids that we learned a lot about. And I wrote a book about this called Little Shoes that never got to come home. She passed away while going to residential school, my grandmother's sister. And we don't know where she's buried, and so she's also is in an unmarked grave somewhere in Norrie House. And that's also a very important thing to talk about, that we have a lot of kids still that we want to bring home, right? My dad lived on a chap line, but when he was 10 years old in 1945, that was a long time ago still, but 80 years ago, he went into the community for the first time to live there permanently. When he went into the community for the first time to live there permanently, he had to go to what's called a day school. Now, you don't know, who here has heard of day schools before? Not many people have heard of day schools. Some of you have. Day schools are very similar to residential schools. They did very similar things. The only difference was that kids, they got to go home after school was over. The next day they would go back to school. But they had the same things happening in those schools. My dad was a day school survivor. And my grandmother, when she went to school, she was never allowed to speak her language. And language is such an important tie to culture. I always encourage kids to learn your language. So learn the language of your family, your culture. It's so important to know yourself. My grandmother was not allowed to speak Cree when she was in school. My dad, when he went to a day school, he was not allowed to speak Cree when he was at school. He would get in trouble if he did that. And so what he used to do, just to remember, so that he would always remember his language, he used to sneak off into the woods around the school during recess. When he got to go outside, he used to sneak off into the woods and speak Cree with his friends, just so they would never forget the language. But at the same time, we hear a lot about how the experiences of a kid who went to school, when they grow up, they pass that experience down to their kids. They pass that experience down to their kids, and it goes on and on like that. And that was what happened in my family too. So my grandmother went to residential school, my dad went to a day school, and they learned that the language wasn't very important because of their experiences there. Now I have two brothers. I'm the youngest actually. I always tell people, my oldest brother Cam, he just turned 53 earlier this month. He's the shorter one, and he's a little bit uglier than me. And then I have my middle brother, Michael. He's a little bit taller, and he's a little bit better looking. He just turned 50 a couple of days ago. And I'm the youngest, and I'm the tallest, and I'm the best looking. My parents stopped when they finally got it right. They said, "Oh, phew, we finally did it." Right? But my brothers and I, when we were born, we were raised we were never taught the language. We were never taught Swampy Cree. That's the language of Norway-House Cree Nation. And my dad always used to say, this is true. You can't change the past. Everything that has happened has happened. And so my dad never really regretted anything. Because he said, well, what's the point of regretting something when you can't go back and change it? You can only move forward. You can only move forward. I think it's also a very good teaching. You can only move forward all the time. But he regretted one thing. And that is that he never taught my brothers and I the language. When we were born, he thought the language wasn't important. As he got older, and people began to heal and talk about their experiences, and things began to change, he realized that we would have been much better off if we had learned the language, if we had learned Swampy Cree. And so now what you'll see, and in a few moments when I read When We Were Alone to you, you'll see that there is Cree in this book. Every single book I write now, and I've written lots of books, every single book that I write now has the Cree language in it because it's a way for me to share the language. So I think one of the ways that we can really learn to respect one another is to learn a few words in our languages. To be able to say hi in our language. So in Cree, hi is tansi. That's how you say hi. Everybody say hi in Cree? Tansi. Tansi. Tansi, that's great. And then thank you in Cree is ekozani. You guys say ekozani? Ekozani. It's great to hear that. So I want people to learn some words in Cree. I definitely want Cree children to see their language in books and to be encouraged to learn their own language. The first time I ever read When We Were Alone to a group of kids was in a school in Winnipeg where it was mostly all Indigenous children. And actually CBC was there to record this as well. And after I was done reading, the reporter asked all these kids, what was your favorite part of When We Were Alone? And almost all the kids who were Cree in that class said the language. That was my favorite part. I got to see the language. So, and finally for me, it is also it is an opportunity for me to learn some of my own words from my culture. So the more I've written books and included Cree in them, I've also learned a little bit of Cree myself. And that's been such an important journey for me to go on. So I've always written about residential schools. I've always written for reconciliation. I try to write for language as well. When We Were Alone is a very special book to me. It's the first picture book I ever wrote. And I thought what I would do is I would read to you from When We Were Alone. But When We Were Alone is what I think is one of the best examples of how we learn in the best way possible. And that is learn from our elders. Learn from the people who are in our families, who can teach us things about their experiences, so we can learn more about ourselves. And so When We Were Alone is a book. It's about a conversation between a grandmother and a grandchild. And the grandchild asks questions. Now, as I said at the beginning, I want you to ask me questions in a little bit, so you can learn maybe some things from me. The grandchild asks the grandmother questions, and the grandmother answers those questions by telling little stories. And that's what When We Were Alone is all about. It's about the stories that we tell, the questions that we ask, and about some of the history of residential schools. You know, residential schools, at the heart of that school system, it was there to try to change a child's identity. And in how we change their identity, how the government and the church used to try to change the identity of Indigenous children was to first of all take away the language, because they realized that language was the most important part of culture, so we weren't allowed to speak our language as Indigenous people. They used to try to not allow us to wear the clothes that we love to wear. And that's where the Orange Shirt Day comes from. Has everybody heard the story of Phyllis Webstaff? Yeah. The orange shirt? So they made us wear uniforms. They didn't let us wear the colorful clothes that we might love to wear. They didn't let us see our families very much. And that's how we learn the most about ourselves, through our families. We're not allowed to see our families very much. And then finally, just like I'm trying to grow my hair long now, so many Indigenous people traditionally wore their hair in braids, and every kid who went to these schools had their hair cut because the braids don't just look good, even though they look good, but they also mean something. And how they're worn, and how the braids are worn, and how they're woven together, it means something culturally, it means something spiritually. And so those are the 4 ways in which I address identity in When We Were Alone. So what I thought I would do is I read to you When We Were Alone. It's going to go up on screen. Oh, there it is right there. And I'm going to read it to you from the book here, and then you're going to see all the beautiful pictures. So this picture book was drawn by Julie Flett. Julie Flett is a Métis illustrator who is from British Columbia, unfortunately, I can't draw. So if I ever drew one of my picture books, no one would ever buy it. Because no one, I mean, it would just be so bad.